What did you want to be when you were 11?
When I was 11, I wanted to be a stunt car driver preacher.
A stunt car driver preacher.
Yes, yes.
Hi, I'm Greg Davenport, and welcome back to the JGD Prepared Service Podcast, where we recognize and celebrate everyday heroes, the people who quietly serve humanity without seeking the spotlight. Through this podcast, we share stories of compassion, resilience, and selfless service from individuals whose efforts often go unnoticed. Our mission is simple and yet profound: to remind our listeners that heroism isn't limited to grand gestures, but is often found in the kindness and courage of those living next door. By highlighting these unsung heroes, we aim to inspire others to act with empathy, purpose, and a spirit of service in their own communities. Today's guest is Dr. Jeremy Welsh. Jeremy and I have worked and volunteered side by side in PA education and humanitarian work since 2009. He is a leader in graduate medical education and the PA profession, and his story is amazing and one worth hearing. But before we start, be sure to like, share, and follow us. It really helps. Hi, Jeremy. It is so good to have you here today. It's been a long time. How are you doing?
I've been doing well. New exciting things in life. Got to switch states and move around a bit, and new job. So, never boring.
Yeah, you're in tornado country now, aren't you?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. And trying to move here and figure what that even meant was quite the adventure. But looking for houses, we saw about a 50-50 split of tornado shelters. So it was interesting.
Well, have you ever lived in tornado country before, or has it always just been the Virginia? Because you went from Virginia to Arkansas, and that's quite a switch. In Virginia, you're kind of can be in hurricane territory there. And so now it's a little bit different, but still a big disaster component for where you live, right?
Oh, yeah, it was definitely new, and hearing the testing or the tornado sirens they have in town.
Do they do that at noon every day?
Every Wednesday at noon. Every Wednesday.
Yeah. You better get used to that sound if you hear it. Yeah, I'll tell you what. This is what people do. Or what people are supposed to do when that alarm goes off is they're supposed to go either to their storm shelter or the lowest level in the building or home that they're in, find an inner room with no windows, and crouch down, stay put until you get the all clear. But that's not what I see people do in Arkansas, which I lived in for a short time, and in Nebraska, where I live now. When the alarm goes off, they all go outside and look to see if they can see the tornado.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're right. If I look up anything having to do with tornado, it's never someone hiding. It's someone sitting on their screened-in porch watching it destroy the neighbor's house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, you got to shoot your little video,
Yeah.
I mean, that's all part of it, right?
It's all part of the experience.
How long have you been in Arkansas now?
We have been here, I think we just hit 2 months.
2 months. And you bought a house.
We bought a house. Yeah,
see, that's long term.
We're ready to go.
I've always had a theory, and that is if I hired somebody and they moved to where the job was, if they didn't buy a house, their longevity was always in question. So you're fully committed and plan on being there for quite a while then. Our lives have crossed a lot over, since about 2009, I think. We were both in the Doctorate of Health Science program through ATSU, and that was a 2 to 3 year doctorate for people in the medical career field. I think we had dentists and nurses and PAs and physical therapists and athletic trainers, all kinds of people in that doctorate program, as I recall. And we went through that, and that's where we met. But then we path crossed a lot after that, as we both entered into the education arena and built various programs across the United States. I know I built 3 PA programs, and then I built the doctorate program at George Fox University, which was basically a bridge for the graduates at that university. And while I was doing that, you were building PA programs. You were part of the one in New York, as I recall, or was that New York?
Yep.
Yeah. And then you went
Clarkson University.
And then Clarkson, and then you went to Lynchburg from there. And at Lynchburg, you not only built a PA program, but you built the very first Doctorate of Medical Science program in the United States. So you were a a trailblazer for the career field. And this was a unique doctorate program that helped PAs get the degree that they really had already earned but weren't receiving, because there's no question the PA program far exceeds most doctorate programs that are out there. But before we go there, what I like to do when I talk to people about their service in humanity and in medicine is I like to get a little bit of their history, and that starts with their childhood. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your childhood and how that formed who you are today.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that is a what a long story it could be, right? I'll give you the abridged version, obviously. I grew up in kind of rural upstate New York, so Syracuse is where people would mostly know. I actually was a little bit south of Syracuse in a small town called South Onondaga. Not a huge population. It might rival yours. It might be around might be around 400 people or so. It was definitely small, but had an absolutely phenomenal childhood. We had 5 acres of land. I remember, the rules back then were, my lab dog named Sam and my BB gun, and come back before it got dark, that kind of thing. So you'd stay outside most of the time. Growing up, we were a relatively big family. So it was myself. I'm a middle child with a younger sister, older sister. But then probably around the age of 10 or so, my parents became foster parents. And we typically had around 6 foster kids in the house at any given time. So it was about 9 of us overall, and it would wax and wane a bit, but around that number. I would say the house was maybe 1,800, maybe 2,000 square feet, like thinking back about it. And it was two bathrooms.
2 bathrooms with 9 kids.
Yep.
And then 2 adults.
Yep.
That's 11 people.
Yeah.
A lot of boys peeing outside.
Probably true. Very true, I imagine.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's tight. Yeah. That's tight. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it brings, I grew up in an 1,100 square foot home with 4 kids and mom and dad and 1 bathroom and very similar. You had a little more square footage, but you had a lot more people, 1 more bathroom, but you had a lot more people. So similar struggles in how that house is managed,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was, the very rare known fact, I guess, about me is I was actually homeschooled until 5th grade. And my parents were, I think they did it from a stance of religion. I think that's what triggered them to want to homeschool and kind of keep me out of the secular version of the world. I think it's their original. I have great memories of my childhood. I enjoyed all of it. We were extremely poor. I didn't know that. I mean, I thought the world was great. We had land. I had a dog. We did great things. We went to church. We went to school once we started going to public school. So it was a phenomenal childhood, and really no looking back on it as any real negatives. At some point, I think I did start to recognize kind of the financial differences between myself and other families. And, I think that probably made me curious around that kind of stuff. My mom and dad were extremely hardworking, but not college educated. I'm a 1st-gen college student. But I mean, extremely hardworking, extremely smart people, just had not been, afforded that ability to go off to college. So I think, when I was growing up, they were really big on higher ed and said, you have to go to school, whatever it takes, you can't continue this cycle.
So there's quite a story there, and there's a couple things I want to jump back to. But before I get to the things I want to go back to, first I want to ask you, what did you want to be when you were 11?
When I was 11, I wanted to be a stunt car driver preacher.
A stunt car driver preacher?
Yes. We were raised in the church. We did a lot of church, almost all day Sunday, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night. We went to a lot of church. So I think that definitely influenced me to, preacher was like a very aspirational, that obviously still is, to be in that calling. But at that time, but during the week, again, 11-year-old's version of the world, right? Like, what does a pastor do during the week? Nothing. There's no church. I mean, we don't know what all the other stuff that they do. So I was like, well, I got to find something else to do. And again, I was raised rural. So we had go-karts and 4-wheelers and dirt bikes, all junk, all broken down. taped together, duct tape on the seat was like normal. We didn't know any better, but they were always there. And, my dad was always working on them with me. So I think that gave me this idea that a stunt car driver would be cool during the week. Well, I preached on the weekends, I guess. I don't know.
That would have been a great job. You kind of did a few of these things. You have a PhD in religion. I don't know the exact name, but in some type of religion thing. Did you get a degree in stunt driving? I don't know, but you might do that maybe on your spare time. I don't know, but correct me if I'm wrong. You have the religion degree, you have the law degree, you have and I'm talking doctorates now, and you have the health science degree, and you have a PhD. Is there a point where you're going to stop getting degrees? Because I know you have master's degrees under those and bachelor's degrees under those, a few certifications in different things. Are you going to school now?
I actually just graduated, let's see, 3 weeks ago with my Doctor of Executive Leadership degree.
No,
So
wait a minute. Wait a
I am
minute.
not
That's after the PhD.
correct.
So
Yep,
you got the PhD, and now you just did this doctorate of executive leadership.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you look back on your life, can you recall a moment so impactful it pushed your life trajectory? For me, and I've said this repeatedly, so people who've listened to me already know this, but one of the biggest impacts on my childhood was sitting in front of the TV watching the draft, information coming out, as my brother, who was 9 years older, was of draft age. And then living on a street where people had died in Vietnam, and knowing that my brother may be pulled into that world. And he did. He actually went in the army and did go to Vietnam for a year. But I remember how impactful that was, and the fear that was involved with that, and how that kind of, it actually gave me a form of patriotism, which it could have gone the other way, but it didn't.
The death of my friend when I was younger, and then a very, very good friend died in a car accident when I was 21. And that he died was absolutely horrible. And I think it was, it was before I was in healthcare, but I remember still being brought in to see the body and had chest tubes and all these other kind of things that although I was an EMS and a paramedic, like I didn't know the full extent of what medicine, was at that point. But probably most impactful about that event is I was supposed to be in the car. So that morning, I'd actually had my wisdom teeth pulled. And every Friday night, we would go drive the boulevard, which for younger people probably don't know that reference. But, we had cars. My first car was a 67 Camaro that my dad and I, pieced back together from a junkyard. And all of my friends in that world kind of had cars we had fixed up, and, we'd go to the boulevard. Well, you literally just drove up and down again. It would seem weird if I saw it now, but then it seemed completely normal. I was supposed to be with him. I actually always sat, like we had 4 of us that were always in the exact same car every single Friday. And I would sit back driver's side and always had the same friend in the passenger front and the same friend. I mean, it was our routine. We were simple people. And that was a simple joy of life, is going to see all the cars. Because I had my wisdom teeth pulled that day, I was like, I'm going to opt out. I'm not going to come. I didn't feel good. And unfortunately that night, my friend they were T-boned, and it was all driver's side. My friend died. He was driving. And the passenger seat, which was empty, was non-existent. And it actually hit the person in the back passenger side to the point that they were hospitalized. They did survive and had full recovery. But that was the seat I would have been sitting. And I think that did have an impact on me. There was a lot that I think I went through. And, you're, as a 21-year-old male, I mean, who do you talk to about those kind of things? It wasn't something I would have let out at the time. And I remember having some meeting that they had of our friends and family. And I'm sure it was kind of that year's version of, a kind of a post-traumatic event, follow-up. But I mean, no one knew what to say. So a lot of it was, a prayer here, or, we miss our friend. But inside, I think I had this moment of like, that I wouldn't probably be here if normal events had taken place. And then shortly after that, so not that long later, maybe a year and a half later, I was in PA school when 9/11 happened. So Also remember, although I was in Syracuse, New York, I was a New York firefighter and paramedic. So when that happened, it was everyone in New York in those industries. It felt that brothers and sisters had died. And we were dispatched to go to New York City. By the time, you're in Syracuse and kind of headed that direction, they called us off. I never went to ground zero, but we were kind of staging. And so we were the backup to the backup to the backup. But when they made the decision that it was recovery instead of rescue, they stopped us and we returned to Syracuse. But I remember watching the images over and over and over again, feeling helpless, in the EMS world. I mean, how many shows and videos, how many parades, and I think that really did, again, just kind of connect with my sense of like, I should be doing more. This can't just be about me getting up and going to work every day. And again, I was a younger guy. I mean, probably not thinking to the depth that I hope I do now, I guess, that I've learned and grown. But at the time, you knew something inside of you was different. You just saw the world a little bit different, and that stuff had been taken away from us as proud New Yorkers, proud firefighter in New York. I think that really was something that was impactful to me. And then I'll end up in, I actually attempted to enlist after that. Again, unknown, not a rarely known fact. I actually applied to the Navy, and they were specifically recruiting PAs at that time. I'm sure many divisions of the military were, but the Navy somehow I got connected with. I got all the way to the end, and they found out that at the age of 14, I had asthma, and I was disqualified from being in this. That was the end of it. And I hear that might not exist now, but at the time, I felt a strapping young man. I was about to, finish PA school. By the time, I found out that I wasn't able to go. So I was kind of in a spot where I wasn't really sure what to do. And, ended, because of my paramedic background, eventually just ended up in emergency medicine and did some trauma stuff. Was kept as a firefighter and paramedic first couple years of my work as a PA, and then eventually kind of doubled down, had to cover a lot more work in the hospital and wasn't able to keep up with the pre-hospital stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember 9/11. I didn't have a TV at the time. I was working as a PA, but was in a remote spot. I actually got on the internet and was chatting the way we did it back then. I think it dialed up, and a friend of mine said, I don't know, I was just talking crap, and he said, "Have you turned on the news today?" And I remember turning on the news, and then how devastating that was. And it was devastating, and I think the effects of that have never totally resolved. I think it changed our country and people forever. And I remember the initial or shortly thereafter, how it really created such a loving environment where it didn't matter what your religion was, what your color was, what your you know, sexual orientation was. None of that mattered. Everybody bonded together, and it just seemed like all this conflict kind of melted away for a while.
It was like every day driving to school as I was finishing PA school was like they played "I'm Proud to Be an American"
Yeah.
every morning on the radio. And it was, I mean, I just remember feeling like emotional and tearing up as I drove into school. And everyone felt that. I mean, I remember talking to people. It's like, gosh, like there's just so much going on in the world. And I remember it actually became hard to kind of keep with PA academics. Like the whole world's changing. There's all these things going on. You're watching all this stuff on the news every single day. And I think some people really hunkered down and, we're going to be in medicine. We're going to be part of the solution. I do remember feeling very distracted. I remember feeling kind of like maybe questioning more the PA route. Like I could stay in EMS and look at EMS needs us now. And I remember that kind of internal conflict.
PA school was hard. I mean, it was I don't think people realize, I have two girls in college right now, and they have a schedule where they attend school maybe 3 hours on Monday, maybe 3 on Wednesday, 2 on Friday, and 1 on Tuesday and Thursday. So they attend class from 1 to 3 hours a day, right? PA school was like from 8 a.m. till 4 to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. That's in class. And if you look at academics, you know as well as I know that for every hour in class, the expectation is you'll spend 2 hours outside of class studying, doing research, and so on. Well, that's impossible, because if you're in class 8 hours a day, 8 to 9 hours a day, how do you spend 2 times that outside of class? Because if it was 8 hours in class, that would be 16 hours out of class. That's 24 hours. There's no time for sleep, no time to eat. So I don't think people realize how intense PA school really is, and how it really is beyond comprehension, the amount of material that you have to learn in the amount of time you're expected to learn it in. Because again, theoretically, you can't even do an 8 hours of class day schedule, because you're supposed to have 16 hours outside of class for that 8 hours, and that's impossible. So
Well, and it was then and continues to be that the majority of programs, to my knowledge, you still have to go, which is, again, is different. There are other
mandatory
medical
attendance. What you're saying is mandatory attendance. Yes.
You had you had to be sitting your butt in that seat.
Yes.
It was not, there was no virtual probably when we were in school.
Right.
But I mean, that was not an option. Even if there had been, it would not have been. And as you said, I mean, you studied all night. I mean, I remember numerous all-nighters to try to pass an exam the next day. And that's just what you were willing to do. Now, we didn't know any better. I'll be honest. I didn't know any better. I thought maybe this was all grad programs, but unbeknownst to the majority of the world, the PA profession, the PA master's degree, is the number one most credit-heavy master's degree in the United States.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's got more credit hours than a PhD does. I mean, let's face it, graduate hours. Now, it's not a research doctorate. Granted, it's an applied doctorate. And there's a difference between applied and research doctorates. But your PhD is usually 30 hours in a master's degree and 60 hours in the doctorate portion, or 90 total semester hours. For most, some of them you can do in 60. PA programs average about 120 to 130 semester hours of graduate work. And that's ridiculous. It's crazy to get a master's degree, which is 30 to 36 hours of graduate work. So it's crazy to give a master's degree for 130 hours of graduate work when everybody else who gets a master's degree does 30 to 36 hours of graduate work. Again, another story for another day. So tell me a little bit about your career in medicine beyond what we've already discussed, and why you transitioned into the education world.
You enter that field, and at that point, again, I came from the pre-hospital background. So, they gave me this long white coat, which I actually still wore back then. I'm not sure a lot of white coats are being had in the hospital these days, but I was very proud of it. And I saw myself as kind of this amazing badass PA that was in emergency medicine and trauma. I was very proud of kind of that identity that I had that worked through. But there was always this like nagging, can there be more? And now I call that curiosity. Back then, I didn't really know what it was, but it was just this, could you do more? So I think it consistently pushed on the back of my brain to say, well, could you do more administratively? So eventually I ended up becoming, which I hate this title, but I did accept it back then, the director of mid-level services. I hate the term mid-level, but back then, I didn't know any better. So I took that. And then it was, could I be, why can't a PA serve on the committee within the hospital? So, then I got some committee work. Things of that nature would intrigue me for why wouldn't I be helpful, insightful, valuable to that work. I knew nothing about obviously where my life would head. But in the moment, it felt important that I had a credential similar to many of the people I saw around me. And the people around me were MDs, DOs, DNPs. There were PhD administrators. There were perfusionists. I remember there was a perfusionist back in the day in Syracuse who had a PhD. There was a PA that I worked with who was a PA after they had their PhD in neuroscience, and they did neurosurgery. And I thought, wow, what an awesome, cool combination of that neuroscience PhD and then the PA application side. So eventually I did my doctorate. I was the inaugural class at ATSU. And we share that journey through ATSU. Great school. How did I know that would ever be so impactful? Not until I was older. I picked it because they were PA friendly. I knew almost nothing else about it. And our degree wasn't for PAs. Like you said, I mean, it was anybody in the healthcare industry. And you can define healthcare industry pretty broadly. And I think they did, but it was, focused on that. but eventually understanding like the scope of what AT still was, the founder of the DO, holistic medicine, really big on all people being able to provide the most they can to patients. And it wasn't really a focus on one type of degree, although again, they created the DO, Andrew Taylor Still, AT Still created the DO degree. You and I met during that program, and lots of other great minds were there. It was a cool opportunity. And, the DMSC, I think, I'm not sure I could go back and like find a paper on it per se, but the concept of it was definitely born during that time at AT Still. I felt a lot around, why am I leaving the PA world to be able to have a doctorate? Like, why can't I have a PA doctorate? Like, there's DPT and there's all these other doctorates. Like, I felt like I was kind of leaving PA to get a doctorate to come back to practice in PA. You and I have talked about this for so long, but something planted a seed there, and it wasn't that much longer. I started in 2008, that inaugural cohort, August of 2008. Back then, they allowed you to do 2 years. I think that only lasted for like 2 years because so many people failed out of the program.
The 2 years was crazy.
It was intense. In my AT Still, Doctor of Health Science degree was harder and more credit heavy than my traditional PhD.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't. Yeah. Yeah. And it should be a research doctorate too, because there were 25 credit hours of research in that DHSC program.
And the course was like dissertation 1, dissertation 2, dissertation 3. Although in the end they would say it was like dissertation light. Again, at the time it didn't feel that way.
No.
But it was a lot of work. But out of that came the DMSC. Great group of people, and we all got together and created something that I think did change the world in some sense, or at least added a tool to the toolbox.
That was so controversial.
No.
I mean, it was so controversial. I mean, people were seething. They were just, oh my gosh, you can't have a doctorate as a PA. You can't do that. You're going to lose your accreditation as a PA program if you pursue this, and blah, blah, blah. And, it was just like, what's all this silliness? I mean, why can't we have this? And indeed, you were able to go forward with it and make it happen. And as you say, there's 40 some programs out there now, and more coming down the pipe as time goes on. That's for sure. It's been quite a good pathway. So in the position you just left, you not only built a PA program there and the DMSC program, but inside that PA program, and there's some components of the DMSC, but I want to talk about the PA program right now. Inside that PA program, your students did a humanitarian trip every year. You had a student organization that planned and coordinated international trips to places like the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Nicaragua. Tell me a little bit about that, and why, when that was something you did not have to have as part of a PA program to be accredited, why you did it.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that I've so appreciated in my life. And again, I think it was placed there, happenstance, but just what an amazing opportunity. I was at Clarkson then. So I was the founding director of clinical education at Clarkson University. And I had a great boss, Dr. Mike Whitehead, and he, we were brainstorming, and we would openly say, like, the RPA accreditation is the minimum. It's not the goal. Like, that's just telling us what we have to do to stay accredited. What can we do to make this program really desirable and have a positive outcome, have a positive impact? And there was two big things there that honestly started at Clarkson and then really, really followed up at the program in Virginia. And that Clarkson event, as I was brainstorming, I had known some people at Damon College, which is in Buffalo, Rochester kind of area of New York. All PA programs and PA program directors want to help PAs and other PA programs. And Damon was like, yeah, what's ours is yours. We know you're a startup program. You actually might siphon some students off of us. No big deal. lots of people want to be PAs, will be good. And they invited me. So I went on this trip and met a gentleman named Raphael Hanea. And this gentleman was from the Dominican Republic and was a graduate of Damon, not the PA program, but from their undergrad program, and somehow had told the PA program that if they were interested, he had connections in the Dominican Republic that would help get students some international flavor. So I went. It was absolutely life-changing. I mean, I had probably not been out of the country. And if I had, it was probably like to Cancun, which I don't know. By the time you get there and go to the 5-star resort, I don't know if you can really classify that as being out of the country. So being here, we're in the DR. Yes, we fly into an area that is relatively populated, but we would trek up several hours up into areas that were very rural and underserved. I mean, there's really no local health care. And I got to this experience. I mean, it opened my eyes as a person. It opened my eyes as a provider, and definitely as an educator, that we are the true partners to our students, and we owe them as much as we can pack in their education. This is not how can we get you through as quick as physically possible, but we owe you an experience that I hope and pray you eventually want to give to somebody else. So I really adopted almost immediately that if I can get our students to do an international trip during their PA time, and my hope was always 2 trips, so they would do it their first year, do it their second year, and then eventually when we created the doctorate, we got a third year out of them because they were TMSC fellows in that early version, that they would be more likely to give back because they had seen how it was done. And I also felt anecdotally, but I do think that the research supports it, that it didn't have to be international. Once they saw what they could do to give back, they can give back in their community, they can give back in the free clinic within their town or in a neighboring city. It was really just about trying to connect what I already knew was in their brain. I mean, they want to be a PA, they want to be in healthcare, but how can I show them how to be in a position where they can provide that altruism to another human? And it's not about compensation. It's not about being a physician or a PA or a nurse. It's just about being there and being someone who could give back. So that happened at Clarkson. We did it for several years. I was at Clarkson for 3 years, but I eventually decided it was time to go, not because Clarkson was a bad area, but it was just a life event. It had been -20 for 2 weeks. I was on the edge of my mind. And also for me to afford to teach there at that time, because PA educators were not making a fortune. They still don't make a fortune, but back then it was pretty bad. I worked at the university from 7 to 3, and then I worked in the hospital from 3 to 11, and I had done that for 3 years. And at that was 16-hour days for that long. I just got to a point that I couldn't sustain, so I just felt like it was time to do something different. Led me to Virginia. What happened there ended up being same thing. We got to do that 1 trip a year. What also came from that, and one thing that I really tried to accomplish at Clarkson, which is up in Potsdam, New York, which I just was never able to get done, is I wanted to create a clinic that was completely free and run by faculty and students. And I was not able to do that in New York. It was something that there was normal, I think, politics and logistical barriers. It just didn't come to fruition. I wouldn't say I remember anybody ever being like a block to it, but just never got there. But it was actually one of my qualifiers to come to Virginia. I won't come here unless I can do international. I could do a free clinic that is run and operated by faculty and students, so student-run free clinic. And I want to do a doctorate degree. And every single person on that other end of that call in Central Virginia was like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. None of this stuff seems reasonable, but we really want a PA program, so I guess we'll give him enough leeway. And I guess if he can pull it out, then we'll let it fly. And that's what came of it. We had trips, and I am very proud that I was able to make that first one happen. But I definitely won't take credit beyond that. You and many other people were like, well, why just DR? And I don't know. I just hadn't thought much about it. But I think you introduced me to Nicaragua, and your school was doing that first. So we got, again, I think you let me come and shadow for a trip. And then we're like, hey, we could do this in Virginia. This would be awesome. And then we added that. And then you and I were in Haiti, and then we were in India. So I mean, you and I have had some time on a plane, that's for sure, together.
Oh, I forgot about
And
Haiti. Yeah,
yeah, oh
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah. So I mean, that
Haiti.
that was kept expanding that international reach for our students. And then it just kind of took on a life of its own. There was a lot of people involved. A lot of people wanted to see the students, and that outside of the international component, one of the areas that I would say I'm really proud of, and it's not proud of me, but proud of what the students made. They took so much ownership of that opportunity. They drove the tickets. They would be on the phone with American Airlines trying to negotiate like a better deal. They would be working with the hotel through a translator to try to get us the best deal physically possible. I mean, those early days, we were staying in areas that that we had negotiated this amazing deal just to get our students that experience. And I will say, because this is probably where people often will push back on these ideas. It's like, well, it's medical tourism. You're coming in, you're dropping in, you're just dumping a bunch of meds and a bunch of people, and then there's no follow-up. I think we were very intentional about, as we grew. I will say I'm sure there was a year or two of that we probably didn't do it to the best of our ability. But after that, we were very intentional about partnering with the local clinic in town, making sure that they had infrastructure, making sure we did follow up with the local physician or health, some kind of nursing, because a lot of places didn't have like a true physician in that sense. They had a version of a nurse practitioner or nurse midwife or something of that nature in the community that we would partner with. So, I mean, we got better, and then the students became more and more engaged, but just the leadership that came out of that, they're very proud of the students really owning that. And then as they got better and better at it, logistically, we could do more and more of it. So, I mean, I think at one point I think we did 4 or maybe a 5th trip in a single year. I mean, we were really getting out there.
Yeah, yeah. I think as I look at those trips, and I'm talking about the ones with students, I remember one of the reasons that I actually approached you about Nicaragua was as I was hoping that we could get multiple schools to go and partner with the ministry that was there, and then the school would be there every 3 months or so, and then we could provide some type of continuity. So I thought that was a great opportunity. But the other thing that I really thought was important about these international trips that I observed was how students were able to observe the ethics involved with doing these and the culture of different areas around the world. And not only observe it, but learn from it. Probably perhaps one of the biggest examples that I remember was a student who was eating some food that the locals, who were poor, I mean really poor, who they had given us this decent food for the day, and this dog was begging, as dogs do, and she gave some of that food to the dog. And one of the village ladies, one of the elders of the village, came over and started hitting that dog with a stick, and was really upset that this student was giving that dog this food when that was the best gift they could possibly imagine giving to us, and they were hungry. And so that was a learning lesson, and I definitely talked to the student about this cultural component of how we behave with animals here in our country, but how they're perceived in other countries, and how we need to understand and try to respect. And that's a small thing. And I'm sure that if anybody's listening to this and they're dog friendly, they're going to be upset about hearing this. But indeed, it is a cultural thing, and we need to respect that. But nevertheless, what a great opportunity to learn. And then other things that happened where we ate the local food, and we would go into a village and we would have a family prepare food for everybody. And most of the time when that was done, if I was involved with it, I was paying that family and then trying to get enough for everybody to eat and then having them. So we were stimulating the local economy, but we were also exposing our students to the local cuisine and the culture in that way. So there was so much more to it than medicine, I think. And it was really, what a great thing. I do love that you did the free clinics.
I loved it too. Yeah. I mean, I think being able to do that logistically always makes people nervous, but it really isn't that complicated. And I will say, I mean, gosh, I think when that first happened, that it was 2013-ish. when we first got that up and running. And I wasn't aware of a lot of others. I'm sure there were, but it seems like it is more proliferative now. It seems like there are a lot more PA programs in med schools and nurse practitioner, nurse anesthetists, all these programs that they're really partnered with communities to be able to do free clinics. But it is, to me, one of the biggest wins for all stakeholders. The students get such a great opportunity to see people early. And that's what I've always felt. And this is where it's myself and others sometimes disagree. I'm a big fan of early immersion. I'm not a great book learner. I never have been, but I'd learn really well in a situation.
Wait a minute. You're so full of crap. So, wait a minute. How many PhDs have we discussed here? How many doctorates? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 doctorates, is that right? Or have I missed one there?
Yeah, 4 that are legit. One that's probably not credentialed as the religious one, but yes, 5.
Okay. So 4.5, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you just said I'm not. What did you say? I'm not
book smart.
I'm not book smart.
I
I'm not book smart.
yeah.
I'm not book smart. You have a
I'm still
research doctorate, several applied doctorates, and getting one doctorate alone for most people is a major undertaking. And you just said what? What did you say? Say that again.
well, see, this is
You
important.
said
Although
I'm not book smart.
you're not intentionally highlighting it for the reason I'm going to, but I appreciate that you did. I am not book smart, but I am so stubborn that I will not let someone tell me I can't do it. So I will push to make it happen. It's not that I can't read the book. I have no internal drive to read the book.
So you have to work. You have to do the
I have
work.
to work really, really hard to get those things done. But I'm really good at learning on the job. That's what I loved about EMS. And I'm not saying that there wasn't books part of it. And I'm sure it's probably way more intensive now than it was when I did it way back in the day. But I loved the street learning. I loved learning in the back of an ambulance. I loved learning as the patient was in front of me. And I loved that. I hated PA school in the beginning. I loved clinical rotations. Just basically that kind of learner. In the clinic, in the free clinic, you have appropriate delegation, but such a beautiful curve of skill acquisition. It is not just you sat in a room and did didactic instruction for a year because you weren't smart enough to touch patients. But a year and 1 day in, okay, fine, you can touch patients now. We were immediate immersion. So get the student in the clinic, and you hope that, that day you learned about a cardiac drug, you learned about the anatomy and pathophysiology of the heart, you have some kind of diagnosis that came out of clinical medicine that's cardiac related, and then lo and behold, that Friday when you're in the clinic, you see a patient that has a heart, or you see someone who has their medications changed that are cardiac related, hypertension. And I just felt like that was the way my brain needed to connect, is I just didn't really get it. I honestly believe to this day, I don't think I really understood hyper and hypothyroid all the way until the end of PA school when I saw a patient that had it, because I somehow did 2 weeks of endo. And I think it's not because I requested it. I think they didn't know what to do with me. So they're like, well, that guy will take a student. And I ended up 2 weeks in endocrinology. And then I was like, oh, I see patients with it. They're describing the symptoms on one side, describing the symptoms on the other, and I'm seeing it. Wow. Okay. I guess it's not as complicated as I thought it was. But that's just how my brain has to make the connections. So it worked in the free clinic. They watched us. Then they watched with a little. Then they started to do more and report out. Then they would do more, report out, and read the labs. Then they'd do more, report out, do the labs, and read the imaging. And by the time our students would enter the beginning of their clinical phase, they've already been seeing patients, have worked on their communication, worked on reporting to an attending and how you should present a case, and that history does go here and physical does go here, even though in the real world, yes, we kind of jarble it together and we're talking and examining at the same time, but you can't present it that way. So our students became really good. And I think that set them up for more success in the clinical phase. And as you said, and I guess I'll paraphrase my own words so I don't put words in your mouth. I think what we do in PA is just as intensive as many of the other medical programs. We just have shorter time to do it, which means we have to work even harder, right, in my opinion. So by doing so, you want to give that student every opportunity to succeed. And It can't just be the people that are good with books. It has to be the people that are visual learners. It has to be the people that are tactile learners. It has to be someone, and you use all those components to try to put it together. And I think we saw success with students year after year after year, at both the previous institutions I've been at, raved about that hands-on clinic and international work as the highest rated, highest impact events of their PA academic career.
Right. Well, I think what I really like about it is not just that early immersion, which you did, with your first year students, the trips that you did first year and second year on an international basis to show them the different cultures of the world and their medical systems and what was available and not available. But what I really like about the free clinic, in addition to that, is it showed them the human side of medicine because in a free clinic, it's not uncommon to see people at some of the worst times in their lives. And in international work, you're seeing people that live under a different umbrella than you would see in the United States. So these exposures really, in my opinion, expand the human side of medical care and that humanity of why we do medicine. And I think that's such an important lesson. I think that's really cool that you incorporated that into your programs. I think it was very forward thinking, and I think it made a huge difference in your graduates. I think they're probably all still involved in some type of service, whether it be international trips or working at a free clinic or something like that. So I commend you on that. I think that's pretty cool. Can you think of one event that might have occurred related to the free clinic or an international trip that was really impactful on you as an educator and a PA?
Um, I can think of so many, but I will highlight one that you and I and my wife were on, and that was when we were providing care in, 99% sure it was Nicaragua, and we were at a clinic where one of the providers had seen a patient on a day, and the patient had some decent disabilities, and the family had been really trying to provide a very high level of care in a house that was dirt floor. We saw it, tin roof, heating and creating or cooking food in that same space. It was you could see ash all over the walls and the ceiling and things of that nature. I mean, it was a tougher living environment than most of our students had ever seen. And we saw them one day, and we spent a very long time with them. We had an OT with us that time. We did some some splinting. I think we had some PT. We did some stretching and some other things. We had PA, and we had bedside ultrasound. That trip was one of our first bedside ultrasound trips where we could actually we were really showing the students why every clinician should understand bedside ultrasound, and why we think it's like, to me, it's like the new cool stethoscope is having ultrasound in your pocket. So I remember all of that, and you probably remember this trip, but I mean, it is, and we did that, and we felt really good. I remember having that conversation at the end, and you were really good about this. You were always really good about the community engagement. I definitely give you all that credit, 100%, about making sure the community felt, that we were giving back, making sure that we tried to stimulate the local economy, making sure that we were appreciative of the food and the culture. You used to give all the pre and post, cultural updates and things like that. So I mean, that was really all you and contributing and making our team better and better. The next day, I remember standing outside, and I saw someone pulling up on a scooter or a moped or something of that nature. And it was the father and mother holding that same child who had died.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can see it like it was yesterday.
yeah,
And us all running over, not really being sure what had even happened. I think we thought initially maybe he had fallen or there was an injury. I mean, it was just this moment. And then, of course, I think the more senior people, as soon as we saw him, we knew that he had passed away. Um, but I mean, obviously a horrible event for that family. But several things came out of that. And you kind of talked about this earlier, where like the positive comes from the negative. Negative, obviously, what a loss for that family, that child that they had taken so much care of and so much love, and sad that he had passed away. it was at a spot where we could talk to the students about that. The students saw it and felt that emotion with us and understood why we were taken back. I mean, as seasoned people, there's still that emotional component. There's still that human aspect of what we're doing, and saw us try to comfort the family and talk. And I truly remember a lot of time with the students, a lot of after action, um, which, several of the faculty, including you, really, really gave the students really good, we're here for you. And here's some of the implications of what this means. And we talked a little bit about what that means outside the U.S. versus in the U.S. I mean, they were going to go home and bury him. I mean, that was as simple as it was in that community. There was no funeral. There was no event. There was no police or authority. I mean, it was just that simple. But I remember there being that time where we were kind of walking through that. And I remember the mother coming to us the day before we left. And if you remember, their commute from their home to where our clinic was not brief. And their son had just died. And the mother came to us as the last day we were leaving that clinic and thanked us so much for everything we had done for that family. And we were thinking, gosh, no, we have done nothing. We are so sorry for your loss. And she was so appreciative that we had been there, with her and her husband when it had happened. I mean, it was just a truly impactful event. And I know to this day, when I see now alumni, off with their doctorates and their PA and owning their own clinics and hospital bigwigs now, when I still talk to those students that are now all grads, they still talk about that story, about that event that really put them in a space where they had seen something of such impact and such value to their personal and professional lives.
It's really unfortunate. In medicine, you're never going to escape death. I mean, that's part of the job, unfortunately. Part of the humanitarian service. I mean, when we were in Haiti, I remember there were dead people in the street that were bloated and been laying out there for who knows how long. And there was still a government in existence then, but the warlords were pretty much running everything. And I remember when I remember we also had a death there where a young man had fallen out of a tree, and again they just buried him. There's no process, of course. They just go on with life, and it's a day-to-day existence in these really impoverished, low-income countries. In Vanuatu, they just buried them along the trail. They had a burial plots along the trails. A mother had just died, and they just buried somebody. So it's hardly ever a trip that I've gone on where, and I'm sure that you've gone on, where we haven't seen that. But I do remember that child and how impactful that was, because those parents had this special needs child from a long time, and they were really vested in trying to give this child everything they could, and they were really hopeful. I think anytime we come into a country, they're really hopeful that we're going to make a big difference, and sometimes we give them hope, and that's really important. But there was just not much that could be done in this case, of course. Yeah. Hey, if you were to talk to somebody, that wanted to do humanitarian service or wanted to do things that you've done in your life, either as a PA or an educator or somebody involved in humanitarian service, what type of advice would you give them?
The first would be, I mean, just to put yourself out there and be willing to be uncomfortable. I think most people that ask the question are kind of hedging a bit. I think I want to do it, but do you really sleep in a tent, or is there no electricity? Do I have to go to the bathroom in a hole, in the middle of the woods? So you kind of have to say to them, listen, you have to be outside your comfort zone. We often learn the most and grow the most when we're not comfortable. And I will also tell them, if they're not comfortable day one doing the international, go local. Some people aren't ready for that experience or that exposure. Try local. There's probably a free clinic you can volunteer at. There's probably some group, that is doing something that serves the community, and maybe tiptoe in a bit so that you can continue to grow and see if the full on, like you and I in India for 3 weeks, then a lot of people might not have really enjoyed that trip. And I'm not saying we enjoyed every minute of it either, to be completely honest with you. But I mean, reflecting back on it, it was amazing and
Well, at least
absolutely
in India, I wasn't
cool.
melting like I was in Haiti. I mean, I was melting in Haiti. Holy smokes.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, but I think if they could do that, try local, but find a partner. It's kind of the same thing I give with anyone that not only international, but you want to start a clinic. You might want to be a leader. Find a mentor. Find somebody that you really can confide in. My early days in DR, I was uncomfortable, but not horribly uncomfortable. And I give you a lot of credit for this. Like you helped me push my boundaries. I would not have gone or Haiti by myself. Like I needed my buddy to be 100% honest. Like I probably wouldn't have done it. But once we had done it, I felt just to reflect back on those trips as like a very important parts of my life and my journey. So I think finding somebody that you can do that with, finding a group that can support you in that way is important because having that good experience or having that good support system is what eventually continues to keep your passion strong. Otherwise, it is relatively easy to get discouraged. This trip was too expensive, or I didn't like how this one went, or we sometimes levitate towards the negatives. Finding that support system, that those good people is critical.
I think the worst time for me ever was when I was in Iraq and I had to fly from Erbil to Baghdad because they basically shut down the Kurdish region of Iraq because it was trying to become somewhat independent. And I wasn't supposed to be in Baghdad, and they took my passport and set me down in that airport and were basically jacking me up for about 8 hours and being pretty mean to me. And that was a time where I realized that I didn't like being by myself. So I can agree that it's always good to have a buddy, and it's good because you're under a lot of stress. I remember in India we were seeing probably 100 patients each a day, if not more.
Oh, yeah,
And you can't do that day in, day out and not have some release. You've got to have some ability to have some camaraderie and some release in that process. So yeah, I
yeah.
think investing in organizations is really important. And the only thing else that I think about, and I do like the words that you gave there. I like to jump in, because if you don't jump in, you're never going to know what the water feels like. If I can paraphrase. But I think the other thing that I like to tell people a lot of is, if this isn't your cup of tea, you can donate, money, you can, buy blankets, you can work at a soup kitchen. If you really want to do some humanitarian service, but you don't want to put yourself out there, there's many ways that you can make that happen. It doesn't have to be on an international trip or at a free clinic. There's just many ways you can be a humanitarian. So I love it. I love what you've done. I think this is an interesting question to ask right now, the one I'm going to ask, because you've had a recent move. But I like to ask everybody this. Do your neighbors know who you are?
Yes and no. We have two neighbors. One neighbor knows us. We've got to communicate with them a little bit actually before we moved in, and have connected with them. Across the street neighbors we've connected with. But it's funny you asked that. A friend of mine texted me last night and said, outside of work, how many friends do you and Jessica have in Arkansas? And I had to shy away in that we had done an absolutely horrible job getting out of our comfort zone to go.
The reason I ask that is there's so much negative stuff out there right now that we forget that there's good people all around us. And we don't really know because the neighborhoods, people don't talk to neighbors much anymore. We kind of get in our little circle and we just live our lives. And so we don't realize the goodness that's everywhere. And I really believe that there's a lot of good people around us. So your neighbors, they have no idea that you are one of the greatest leaders in the PA, career field or education field. You're one of the leaders in moving to the doctorate component. But more important than that, at least from where I come from, you're somebody who's led the future of humanitarian service. And you've done that through great initiatives by creating the programs that have free clinics that get that early introduction of the human side of medicine to these students. You've created international trips for students that get that human side of what's going on in the world and how could I help in that relationship. And not only that, you've also served yourself going on trips without students into high threat areas where, there's not only risk to being able to give care, but there's risk to your life in these regions that you've gone into. So you are the hero next door, and your neighbors might not even know it. And they're watching news at night and all this negative stuff in the world that's going on, and they don't even realize that there's goodness all around them because you're living right next door. So I want to commend you as the hero next door, and I want to make sure that you realize that you are one of the heroes that are out there, and your neighbors should know this too. If they don't, it would be good if they did, because otherwise it's just all negative news, right? So you're one of the good ones. I appreciate you, and I appreciate everything you brought to the conversation today, and thanks for what you're doing, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen at. Tell us where you're working at now.
I'm at the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education, AIC for short, and we're in Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Woo! I expect some great things come from there.
Absolutely. That's our plan.